They mocked the veteran for the strange house he was building into the granite shoulder of the mountain, calling it Thorn's Folly, with his loyal dog always at his side. But one evening, his dog Bodhi stopped at a heavy oak door in the cellar and refused to move, as if he sensed something hidden deep within the stone. And when the blizzard the town of Silver Creek never saw coming finally struck, the place they all laughed at became the only thing keeping every last one of them alive. What did the dog uncover in the heart of that mountain? And what did the quiet man know that no one else could see? If you believe that some people are placed in our lives for a reason, like and comment where you are watching from, and be sure to stay with us until the end. Elias Thorne's house was not so much built on the mountain as it was built of it. Where most men saw impassable granite and sheer cliffs, Elias saw anchor points and shelter. He had spent 3 years carving his home into the south-facing slope overlooking the valley, a place where the winter sun lingered longest. He was a man in his late 50s, with a quiet that seemed as old as the stone he worked. His hands, thick and calloused, knew the language of wood, steel, and rock, and he spoke it more fluently than he spoke to people. His constant companion was Bodhi, a German shepherd with a coat the color of sable and eyes that held a steady, knowing calm. The dog moved with the silent economy of a shadow, a partner in the slow, deliberate rhythm of Elias's life. The house itself was a masterpiece of foresight. The main living area was modest. Paneled in pine, Elias had milled himself, with a great stone hearth and a cast-iron stove that could heat the entire space with a few logs of seasoned oak. But the true genius was unseen. He had tapped into geothermal vents deep within the mountain, piping a steady, gentle warmth into the lower levels, ensuring nothing would ever freeze. His water came from a high-altitude spring, filtered through layers of rock and sand into a cistern he'd built inside the mountain itself, a gravity-fed system that required no power, only patience. The windows were triple-paned and reinforced, angled to catch the light but deflect the wind that could scour the mountainside like a blade. A vast, meticulously organized pantry was lined with shelves of preserved food, and a small, sealed greenhouse, lit by carefully placed mirrors and UV lamps, grew hardy greens even in the depths of winter. It was a self-contained world, a fortress of quiet resilience. The town below saw a strange man wasting his life on a paranoid fantasy. Elias saw a duty he couldn't explain. He had learned in the Navy, in places where the world was either frozen or on fire, that comfort was a fragile truce with reality, and he honored that lesson with his labor. In the back of the main cellar, beyond the rows of canned goods and sacks of flour, stood a single anomaly in his own well-ordered construction. A heavy, iron-strapped oak door set directly into the smoothest face of the granite. It was not his work. It had been his father's. The man who had first bought this land and had started the project before he passed. The lock was old and seized with rust. Elias had never tried to force it, respecting it as the one part of his father's plan he hadn't yet been invited into. He would sometimes stand before it, his hand resting on the cool iron, with Bodhi sitting silently at his heel, the two of them paying quiet tribute to the man who began it all. The town of Silver Creek lay nestled in the valley below, a place that measured time in seasons and gossip. When Elias drove his old pickup truck down the winding dirt road for supplies, the mockery was a familiar ritual, as predictable as the changing leaves. It was never cruel, not really, but it was constant, a low hum of dismissal from a town that didn't understand him. The loudest voice belonged to Hank Miller, the owner of the Rusty Mug Tavern. Hank was a large man with a perpetually flushed face and a booming laugh that filled every corner of his establishment. He'd lean over the bar as Elias entered the general store next door and call out, "Hey, Thorne, stocking up for the end of the world again?" His patrons would chuckle into their beers. "Building that bunker of yours any bigger? You gonna have room for the rest of us when the sky falls?" Elias would just nod politely, his gaze steady, and continue his business. He never rose to the bait, never offered a defense. His silence seemed to frustrate Hank more than any argument could, and it only fueled the stories. They said he was hiding from the government. They said he'd lost his mind in the service. They called his home the Doomsday Den and Thorn's Folly, and the names stuck. The other men in town, ranchers and loggers who prided themselves on their own toughness, saw his meticulous preparation not as strength, but as a kind of fear. They faced the winters with bravado and shovels, confident in their generators and their stockpiles of propane. They saw his work as an insult to their own casual competence. The only person who treated him differently was Sarah Jenkins, the woman who ran the general store. She was a widow, her face etched with a quiet sorrow that recognized the unspoken burdens others carried. She never joined in the laughter. Instead, she'd ask him softly, "Need me to order in more of those water filters, Elias? Or that special seed you like for the winter garden?" She spoke to him as a man with a purpose, not a punchline. She saw the steady resolve in his eyes and treated it with a gentle respect that was its own kind of kindness. Elias would thank her, pay for his goods in cash, and load his truck. On the drive back up the mountain, the town's laughter would fade behind him, replaced by the whisper of the wind through the pines. He would unload his supplies, stacking them with the same care he built everything else. And often, before heading upstairs, he would pause in the cellar and look at that old oak door, the one mystery his father had left him, its secrets locked away in the heart of the stone. The reason for the house, the true reason for every nail, every pipe, and every carefully sealed jar, was buried deeper in Elias than any cellar. He had served 20 years as a Navy SEAL, seeing the world at its most unforgiving edges. He had learned the brutal math of survival in the frozen dark of the Arctic and the searing heat of the desert. That service had forged in him a discipline as hard as the granite he now lived in. But it wasn't the source of his drive. The source was a quiet, cold memory from his life after the Navy. He had been married once to a woman named Clara, and they had a daughter, Lily. One winter afternoon, they were driving back from visiting family when a storm, unpredicted and unnaturally violent, had swept down from the mountains. The roads iced over in an instant. A pileup, a skid, and the fragile warmth of his world had been extinguished in a moment of screeching metal and shattering glass. He survived. They did not. The world had told him it was a freak accident, a tragedy no one could have foreseen. But in the long, silent years that followed, Elias came to believe something else. He believed foresight was not paranoia, it was a form of love. It was the duty of the strong to prepare a place for the vulnerable. He had failed his family not through a lack of love, but a lack of preparation. He would not fail again. This quiet, consuming purpose led him to the land his father had left him, and the half-finished project of the house. He worked to honor his memory, but also to build a fortress against the sudden, brutal indifference of the world. One evening, that purpose was given a new and startling dimension. Bodhi, who was usually content to sleep by the fire, began to act strangely. He went down to the cellar and sat before the old, locked oak door. He didn't bark or scratch. He just sat, utterly focused, and let out a low, persistent whine, his nose pressed to the crack at the bottom. For 2 days, he refused to leave the spot for more than a few minutes. His unwavering attention, a silent, insistent demand. Elias had never seen the dog behave this way. He knew Bodhi didn't act without reason. Trusting the animal's instinct over his own reluctance, he finally took a heavy crowbar and a sledgehammer to the rusted lock. The iron shrieked and groaned before finally giving way. The heavy door swung inward on protesting hinges, revealing not a small storage room as he'd always imagined, but a set of stone steps leading down into the darkness. A cool, dry air, smelling of earth and time, drifted up to meet him. Lighting a lantern, with Bodhi close at his side, Elias descended. The steps opened into a vast, vaulted chamber carved directly from the living rock, far larger than his own cellar. It was a second, hidden shelter. Along the walls were empty, sturdy shelves and sealed ventilation shafts. In the center of the room stood a simple, dusty wooden desk. On it lay a thick, leather-bound journal and a sealed envelope addressed to him, his father's handwriting. With trembling hands, Elias opened it. The letter was dated just a month before his father died. "My son," it began, "if you are reading this, then you have found the heart of this mountain. I started this house not just for us, but for the town below. I have studied the weather cycles of this valley my whole life, the old patterns the new world has forgotten. A winter is coming, Elias. Not just a hard winter, but a generational one. The kind that reshapes the land and the lives upon it. I did not have the time to finish. The house above is for the shepherd. This vault is for the flock. Keep it, finish it, and when the time comes, be its steward. This is your inheritance and your duty." The letter changed everything. The weight of Elias's private grief was lifted and replaced by the heavier, clearer weight of his father's purpose. His work was no longer an act of personal penance. It was the fulfillment of a legacy. With the journal as his guide, he now understood the full scope of his father's design, the interconnected systems, the secondary water sources, the hidden airflow channels designed to keep the deep vault fresh and dry. He began to work with a new, quiet urgency, not for himself, but for the people in the valley who laughed at his name. As autumn deepened, he started to see the signs his father had written about in the journal, the subtle language of the wild that the town, with its noise and its electric lights, had long since forgotten. The first sign was the silence. The usual chorus of birdsong in the mornings grew thin, then faded completely weeks before it should have. The squirrels, normally frantic and chattering as they gathered nuts, worked in a tense, grim quiet. Then came the animals. He watched through his binoculars as entire herds of elk and deer moved down from the high country, not drifting down as they usually did, but migrating with a purpose, their heads low, pushing through the forests toward the most sheltered lowlands. They knew. The air itself felt different. The pressure would drop suddenly, making the old wood of the house creak and groan, and a strange metallic taste would linger on his tongue. The sky, even on clear days, held a hazy, milky quality at the highest altitudes, a sign of ice crystals forming in the stratosphere, a precursor to a massive, descending cold front. The wellspring that fed his cistern, usually a steady, reliable flow, began to trickle and slow, as if the mountain itself were holding its breath, the deep aquifers freezing from the top down. Elias intensified his preparations. He made twice as many trips to town, his truck loaded with sacks of grain, salt, medical supplies, and fuel, ignoring Hank Miller's escalating jokes about building an ark. He spent his days in the vault, stocking the shelves his father had built, organizing blankets, lamps, and first aid kits. He cleared and tested every one of the ventilation shafts, ensuring the airflow was strong and clean. He reinforced the great oak door and added a second, insulated door behind it, creating an airlock to protect the stable temperature of the vault. Bodhi seemed to feel the shift as well. The dog grew restless, pacing the perimeter of the house, his ears constantly twitching, a low rumble sometimes vibrating in his chest as he stared out at the valley below. He rarely left Elias's side, a silent, furry barometer sensing the immense pressure building in the atmosphere. One afternoon, an old ranger named Gus, who lived in a remote cabin on the far side of the ridge, stopped by on his way down to the flatlands. Gus was a man with skin like tanned leather who had lived in these mountains for 70 years. He didn't say much. He just accepted a cup of coffee, looked out at the strange, pale sky, and nodded slowly. Feels like 48 coming again, he said, his voice raspy. My father told me about that one. Snow up to the rooftops. Lasted a month. He looked at Elias, a flicker of understanding in his tired eyes. You're smart to be this high up, and this dug in. He said nothing more, but his words were a confirmation. The old knowledge recognized what was coming. The storm was no longer a possibility. It was an inevitability, gathering its strength just beyond the horizon. The first flakes fell not with the gentle drift of a pleasant winter's day, but as small, hard pellets, driven by a wind that moaned through the pines. Within an hour, the pellets became a thick, blinding curtain of white, and the moan of the wind rose to a shriek. This was not a storm. It was an assault. From the window of his mountain home, Elias watched the valley disappear. The lights of Silver Creek, usually a warm, scattered glow, flickered one by one, and then vanished as the main power line, heavy with ice and thrashed by the gale, finally snapped. The town was plunged into darkness and silence, swallowed by the blizzard. The temperature, which had been hovering just below freezing, plummeted with terrifying speed. 10 below, 20, then 30 below zero, with a wind chill that was something out of an Arctic expedition. Elias felt the cold press against the house, searching for any weakness, any crack. But the house held. The triple-paned windows didn't even frost over. The stone walls, packed with insulation, absorbed the cold without letting it penetrate, and the great wood stove in the center of the room radiated a steady, defiant heat. Bodhi lay before the hearth, his head on his paws, watching the flames as if the storm outside were nothing more than a distant rumor. Down in the cellar and the deep vault, the geothermal warmth kept the air cool but safely above freezing, protecting the pipes and the vast stores of food. Elias moved through his home with a calm, practiced rhythm. He checked the seals on the windows, added another log to the fire, and then went below to inspect the cistern and the ventilation systems. Everything was working exactly as it was designed to. He was a captain on his ship, riding out a hurricane of snow and ice. The storm raged for a full day, and then another. The snow piled up in massive drifts, burying fences and cars, climbing the walls of the houses in the valley. The wind never ceased, sculpting the snow into alien shapes and packing it down with the density of concrete. In Silver Creek, the town's casual confidence was breaking apart. The generators, which people had relied on, began to fail as fuel lines froze and batteries died in the extreme cold. Propane tanks, their pressure dropping in the frigid air, couldn't deliver gas to furnaces. Pipes, one by one, froze and then burst, flooding basements with water that quickly turned to solid ice. Families huddled together in a single room, burning furniture in their fireplaces to stay warm, the smoke barely drawing in the face of the wind. The bravado was gone, replaced by a gnawing, terrifying cold and a growing sense of dread. They were cut off, isolated, and their resources were dwindling with every passing hour. The very homes they had believed were safe were becoming frozen traps. The world had been reduced to the howling of the wind and the relentless, suffocating press of the snow. The turn began on the third day, when the wind finally dropped from a shriek to a piercing whine. The path to Elias's house, which he had kept partially clear with a small, powerful snowblower he'd adapted for the altitude, was the only visible track on the entire mountainside. It was a thin, defiant line in a world of white. The first figure to appear was a snow-caked, stumbling shape, barely recognizable as a person. As it drew closer, Elias saw it was Hank Miller. The big, boisterous tavern owner was broken. His face was pale with cold and shock, his usual red flush gone. He had no coat, only a thick sweater, and his hands were raw. He collapsed on the porch, gasping for breath. Elias opened the door and pulled him inside without a word. He sat him by the fire, wrapped him in a thick wool blanket, and handed him a steaming mug of coffee. Bodhi, after a brief, low sniff, nudged Hank's cold hand with his nose before settling back by the hearth. Hank drank the coffee in shuddering sips, the warmth slowly returning to his body and his mind. "My generator froze," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Pipes burst. The whole bar is a block of ice. We burned the chairs. My wife, she's at Sarah's with the others." He looked up at Elias, his eyes filled with a shame so profound it seemed to physically pain him. "I was wrong about you, Thorn. God, I was a fool." Elias just nodded, adding another log to the fire. "There is room," he said simply. "Tell them to come." Hank was just the first. Within hours, a small, desperate procession began to make its way up the mountain. It was Sarah Jenkins who had organized it, realizing her small store couldn't shelter everyone for long. She led a group of families, the children bundled so thickly they could barely walk, their parents' faces grim with fear. Elias met them at the door, directing them inside, his movements calm and efficient. The house filled with the sounds of crying children and the quiet, stunned relief of adults. When the main floor was full, Elias led them down to the cellar. He swung open the heavy oak door to the vault, the one they had never known existed. The sight of the vast, warm, well-lit chamber, with its rows of neatly stacked supplies, rendered them speechless. It was not a bunker built for one man's paranoia. It was an ark, built for all of them. People found places to sit, wrapping themselves in the blankets Elias had stored. The quiet competence of the place was a balm to their frayed nerves. The steady warmth, the clean air, the sight of so much food and water, it was a promise of survival. Elias moved among them, a quiet, reassuring presence, showing them where to find what they needed. Bodhi walked at his heels, a gentle guardian, allowing the children to bury their cold hands in his thick fur, his calm presence a steady anchor in their chaotic world. The people who had mocked the strange man on the mountain were now huddled in the heart of his creation, their lives depending entirely on the foresight they had so casually ridiculed. For 7 days, the blizzard held the valley in its icy grip. The world outside Elias's house was a frozen, hostile wasteland, but inside the vault, a community was being forged in the gentle, geothermal warmth. The shelter, designed by one man and finished by another, held them all. The systems worked flawlessly. The air remained fresh, the water from the cistern ran clear and cold, and the shelves held more than enough food for everyone. The initial shock and fear among the townspeople slowly gave way to a quiet, collaborative routine. No one gave orders, but everyone found a job to do. The women organized a kitchen, preparing simple, hot meals. The men, led by a humbled and tireless Hank Miller, managed the water distribution and kept the pathways inside clear. Sarah Jenkins created a small infirmary in one corner, tending to frostbite and calming frightened children. Elias Thorne was the quiet center of it all. He didn't direct so much as enable, moving through the vault, checking the ventilation systems, monitoring the food supplies, and answering questions with a patient economy of words. His competence was so absolute that it inspired a deep and abiding trust. He was no longer the town eccentric. He was their protector. One evening, as Elias was checking the pressure on a water filter, Hank approached him, his hands twisting a rag. "I need to say it again, Thorne," he said, his voice low so only Elias could hear. "What I said up there, it wasn't enough. We laughed at you. I let it. I called your home a folly, but this is the sanest place I've ever been. You and your father, you saved us." He stuck out a hand. "I'm sorry." Elias looked at the offered hand for a moment, then took it. His grip was firm. "My father believed in being a good neighbor," Elias said, even to neighbors who don't know they need one yet. That simple act of grace rippled through the shelter. Others came to Elias one by one, offering their own quiet, awkward apologies. They were ranchers, loggers, and store clerks who had all shared a laugh at his expense, and now they offered him their respect and their labor. They found that in shared work, a new kind of belonging was formed. They weren't just refugees, they were the stewards of the vault, together. Bodhi seemed to understand the shift. He moved freely among the families now, a furry diplomat, resting his head on the laps of the elderly and letting toddlers tug gently on his ears. He was a constant, warm reminder that they were safe, that in this place carved from stone, they had found a sanctuary built not of fear, but of a profound and patient love. The strange shelter on the mountain had become the heart of the whole valley, keeping it alive. When the storm finally broke, the sun that rose over the ridge revealed a world transformed. The valley was buried under 15 feet of snow, a silent white ocean of impossible beauty and devastation. It took weeks for outside help to reach Silver Creek, but when they did, they found a miracle. Every single person from the town was accounted for, alive and well. The story of their survival became a quiet legend, the story of the veteran they had called a fool, and the mountain house that had become their ark. The town of Silver Creek was never the same again. They rebuilt, but they did so with the memory of the great blizzard etched into their collective consciousness. They did not just repair what was broken, they remade their community around the principle of foresight. Led by Hank Miller and Sarah Jenkins, they established a town council for emergency preparedness. They invested in a community generator, built a centralized and protected cistern based on the design of Elias's own, and reinforced the public buildings. Families began to stock their own pantries with a seriousness they never had before. Elias Thorne's quiet, solitary work had become the town's shared ethos. He never sought recognition. When the town council tried to formally thank him, he politely declined, saying only, "I just finished what my father started." He continued to live in his house on the mountain, a respected and revered figure who was now simply known as Elias. He would come to town for supplies, and instead of mockery, he was met with nods of deep respect and quiet offers of help. Hank Miller would always set a hot coffee on the counter for him, on the house, a silent standing apology and a thank you. Years passed. The seasons turned. Bodhi's muzzle grew gray and his steps became slower, but he remained Elias's constant shadow. Elias himself aged, the lines on his face deepening like the grain in old wood. He lived a peaceful, quiet life, watching the town he had saved grow stronger and more resilient below him. When he finally passed away in his sleep one autumn night, the entire town mourned. They buried him on the mountainside, next to the house he had built, in a spot overlooking the valley. They did not erect a grand monument. Instead, they placed a simple carved stone marker near the entrance to his home. It read, "Elias Thorne. He prepared a place for us." The house and the vault beneath it were deeded to the town, maintained by a committee as a permanent community shelter, a lasting testament to the man they had once misunderstood. The strange, paranoid folly on the mountain had become the very soul of Silver Creek, a legacy of foresight and quiet duty that would outlive them all. The quiet veteran and his loyal dog, whose strange choice was once the town's running joke, had become the reason the whole valley survived. In the end, this is a story about the quiet work we do when no one is watching. It's about the kind of preparation that isn't born from fear, but from a deep and abiding sense of duty, a love for people who may not even understand what you are doing for them. Elias Thorne wasn't building a shelter from the world. He was building a shelter for it. And maybe there's a lesson in that for all of us. How often do we dismiss the quiet ones, the people who don't follow the crowd, who prepare while the rest of us are busy with our daily lives? The Bible tells us that the stone the builders rejected became the cornerstone. Sometimes the people the world overlooks, the ones they might even laugh at, are the very ones God has placed in our path to protect us from the storms we cannot see coming. What do you think? Is true strength found in the loud confidence of the many or the quiet foresight of the few? We'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining us for this story. If it touched your heart, please consider liking this video and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. From all of us here, may you have the wisdom to prepare, the strength to endure, and the grace to shelter others. God bless.